Welcome everyone today. My name is Jason Barris. I'm a senior VP here at Infragistics on the developer tools side. With me today, as usual, is Brian Lagunas, who's our senior product owner across a bunch of different products. But he spends a lot of time on Indigo with me and App Builder. So he's very familiar with the products, but he also does our XAML products and our web products like React and Blazor as a product owner and product manager. And he also does our developer relations. So you'll see him on Twitch and YouTube Live and other streams and things like that. So there is a chat window here. Someone just said, I can't hear you, but I am going through. So you should be able to hear me. It's probably on your end. Yeah. So Anthony, check out your connections because everyone else can definitely hear. So today we are going to talk about master detail apps in App Builder. And, just a little bit, this will be a quick webinar because we've actually done some product improvements since we were going to do this webinar a month ago. We also did a YouTube Live on this about a month ago. And since then, we've made some changes, which makes it even easier. So it's pretty exciting stuff. As usual today, you will get a recording and the slides will be available after the webinar. We'll send you a follow-up email and you'll get everything after that. Please ask questions in the chat window or in the, there's a chat, there's a Q&A. Both we'll answer them live. For the ones that Brian answers, I'll just repeat the answers as they come through. One thing I want to highlight again is get involved. We have a Discord server. So there's a bunch of different ways to get involved with Indigo. One of them is through Discord. So we have a Discord server. This is the link. In fact, I'll take the link and I will paste it in the chat here so everyone can have it. Let me go to everyone, and that is the link to the Discord server. So you should see that, sign up, and you're on live with the team. So people like Brian, people like Constantine, who's our director of development, people like George Abraham, he's the designer on the team. And then, of course, all the team members, Hristo's on there, Dami, and everyone. Javier, Pablo, Zdravko is the team lead. So you will be interacting directly with the product team. If you have questions, feedback, comments, etc., it's the best way to get in touch with us. The other thing that you can use, or the other tool that you can use, is GitHub. So if we go to github.com, let me go to github.com, and I'm going to go to Ignite UI. And I spelled GitHub wrong, I think, of course. There we go. All right. So once you go to github.com Ignite UI, you'll see App Builder has a public repo. And here you can post issues, start discussions. You can see some getting started help stuff. You can view the roadmap. So you can see here some of the things that we're going to talk about today in the roadmap. But this is another place to be just always up to date on what's happening with the product. So Discord, you can see there's a lot of conversation happening on Discord with the product team, with individuals out in the market. And as usual, like this fella here, Peter, he's starting to use the product. So there's a lot of stuff in the very beginning that you want to learn or know. And then we may not see Peter again for a few months, right? But that's the whole point of this two-way communication. We really want to connect with you, to get feedback, to understand how you're using the product, how you want us to build the product, etc. So you're directly with the product team. Abbott says can't copy paste from chat. I have no idea. It's a link to me, so I can click it, but we'd have to email Zoom about that one. But it'll be in every email we send. I'm pretty sure we include the Discord channel. And if we don't, we will on this follow-up, because I know we did that a couple times in the last couple emails, but the link will be in there. Roadmap, I always want to get this out of the way in the beginning, because these questions will inevitably come up throughout the webinar. I get 100 questions a week about when is Blazor coming. Blazor is coming November 10th in a beta form. So right now the code generation is Angular. So if you design anything in App Builder, and you'll see today, you output the code to Angular while we're adding Blazor support for that. So then you basically will say, hey, what code do you want to get out of your app? Do you want Angular code or Blazor code? The design time experience, everything's the same. It's just what code do you want? So you can say, give me Blazor and give me Angular. Great, go to town. So that's why I always say, I get these questions like, oh, I'm going to wait for Blazor. Well, why would you wait for Blazor when everything that you design is just going to work for Blazor? So start now, learn now. It'll take you a while to, understand how everything works, get your screens designed and things like that. And then once you become an expert at it in a week, you will pretty shortly after that see some Blazor code. Along with Blazor, we're shipping a bunch of new controls in the Blazor product. So there's a lot of stuff happening with Blazor. And then we're going to continue to improve this. We try to do monthly releases. So every month there'll be an update to this. So in December, there'll be another update with a bunch of new features. We'll maybe RTM Blazor, maybe that'll come in January, not quite sure yet, but it's going to be within, a month or two after this beta that we ship November 10th. And the reason November 10th is kind of an important date, this is .NET Conf, .NET 6 releases. So it'll be full support for .NET 6, full support for WebAssembly, server side, whatever you want to do. So that's pretty exciting. We talked last time about digital assets. So the ability to upload your own images to our cloud so you can use them in your app instead of always URLs that you have to paste in. This is actually going to ship tomorrow, if not tomorrow, the next day, but this week, along with what I'm going to show you today. So what I'm going to show you today, for you to use it, you have to wait till tomorrow because it's like hot off the presses. And we're doing some final testing today, and you will be able to do exactly what I'm doing here tomorrow. Swagger support, I talked to Constantine about this morning. It's moving along nicely. I have December 15th in here. It may even ship sooner than that. But with Swagger support, you'll be able to have your API up in the cloud. You're generating a Swagger API definition for that. We'll ingest that API definition and allow you to pull it into App Builder, and then it'll generate all of the code that you would use to access those APIs. So we are further helping you deliver on the promise of less code. We don't want you to write code. So we're going to continue to eliminate little pieces or big chunks of code that you would usually write. So if we can eliminate all of your data access code and all of your CRUD code, that is huge. We're already eliminating all of this hand coding of the UI. Huge. And then, of course, coming soon in December is Adobe XD. This may ship earlier. We're kind of at the mercy of Adobe approving our plugin. So Adobe has to approve the tool because it integrates in with Adobe XD. But that means if your design team's using XD and you're using our UI kits for XD to design your screens, like our design system, you can make it your own design system. We will automatically generate code from that Adobe XD design. And then CSS grid, this is a little under the hood stuff, but right now we use a flex layout in the app. We're going to swap it out for CSS grid, which has a little bit more flexibility. And maybe you know it a little bit better as a developer, but every browser now supports CSS grid. So you'll have a really nice responsive fluid layout with the product. So with that, I'm not going to go into any more slides. I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to go right into our demo for today. So what I'm going to do, and again, I mentioned earlier that I'm using a version of Indigo that ships tomorrow, of App Builder that ships tomorrow. And you'll notice in the URL, it says staging. So this is on our, we have dev, staging, production servers. So this will get pushed to our production server in the middle of the night, Eastern US time, because our team is in Sofia and our team is in Uruguay. So sometime in the US, when you wake up tomorrow, you'll be able to access this just on the regular URL. But what I'm going to do is just sign into the staging server here. And I was working on an app earlier, but I'm going to go right here and I'm going to click, I'll click new projects just for people that are not familiar with Indigo Design and App Builder. The way you access it is if you're at infragistics.com, click Design and Development, just click App Builder, and then you're into App Builder. I already kind of bypassed that because I'm on the staging site. And then once you're in here, you've got apps, prototypes, and usability tests. We want to use apps. And I'm going to click this button here that says New App. Now, if I would have clicked Sample App, it actually would have just taken me to this screen. So if you're new, if you've never gone to any of our webinars, definitely open one of these up. These are full, beautifully designed and styled applications that, you know, we want you to take and do whatever you want with. And to give you an idea, if I just click Try Sample on this guy, and I go to one of the sub pages, I mean, this is a full blown application, all the design, all the controls. You can see here the DOM layout on the left-hand side. You can generate this and, you know, generate the Angular code for this, soon to be Blazor, and you have a full app. And then you can just swap out our data with your data or change it to whatever you want. But our goal with these sample apps is to give you a head start on getting going with a new application. So let me go back to new apps. I'm going to use one of our default layouts, just a blank layout. And what I'm going to do with this is create a quick view. So the way that the Flex Grid works and the way that you can set up your application really quickly is you have this default canvas, which is the underlying canvas for where I'm going to put all my row or column layouts and all my components. Here I can set it to a row or a column. I'm going to set it to a column, and I'm going to tell it to start in the upper left, and I want it to start in the upper left for both. So Flex Start in the left. And then what I'm going to do is I could go to the toolbox here and then drag a row layout onto the screen like so, or I can hit Control E, and then Control E brings up this little shortcut. And from here, like anything I type, it'll give me like a real quick access to then click something and get it on the screen. So here, if I wanted to do Control E and then type in row layout again, there's my row layout. So I've set my underlying canvas, and now I've got these two row layouts. What I'm going to do with the row layouts is set these guys as well. So I have 100% width, I have 100% height on that guy, and then the second row layout, which is down here, I'm going to set the same. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm setting up this screen to then accept some UI controls. And since this is the web, we want to use row and column layouts so we get a responsive UI. If you don't want to do that, we still have absolute positioning as an option or fixed positioning as an option. So absolute positioning and fixed positioning is usually the way Windows Forms works. It's the way, you know, WPF potentially works, but there's all different kinds of layout options you have here. We're not stopping you from doing one or the other, but doing a relative layout versus an absolute layout will give you at least some confidence that you'll have a decent experience when you're in the browser. So now I'm going to add a data grid, and I'm going to do the same thing with my data grid. I'm going to tell it to go to 100% width and 100% height. And I'm going to do the same thing in this row layout. I'm going to grab a grid. And remember, my idea here is I'm going to demo a master detail. So with a master detail, we've got something on the top or the bottom or the right to left, and you click something and it loads something in the other grid. It's the absolute most common scenario you will ever run into building an application. Everything's master detail, be it a menu to a screen, be it multiple grids, charts, whatever. So this is just sort of an intro to the basic approach to that using App Builder. So I've got two grids on the screen. Now I'm going to click over to my data tab. In the last webinar, we covered doing data-driven applications. So as a quick refresh, App Builder allows you to upload JSON files or add a URL to a JSON file. So what I'm going to do, I have a URL here. Let me find it. And I'm just going to copy this in just to show you. And this is using our utility called Excel to JSON. And I'll show that in a second as well, but I'll click done. And I'm going to call this webinar data source. I'm going to say select data. I'm going to change this name because I know this is the customers data from Northwind. There's customers, and I'm going to select all. Kind of neat here. It doesn't know what data type this is for postal code, so you can select it and modify it. But what this will do then is it'll actually go ahead and create a data source for me. A nice feature we just added is you can click this link, and this is a link to the JSON file. How did we actually create this JSON file? Well, we published a utility a couple weeks ago. Brian actually wrote it at excel2json.io. And what that does is it allows you to drag and drop an Excel file and will generate the JSON, or you can create a new Excel file, with an empty sheet here. And then as I type, things here, whoops, like name, Brian, age, I think Brian is 26. Well, we'll be kind to me as well. So now you can see it is generating the JSON. I can download this, or I can get a link. And when I click get link, you'll notice this is the format, and this is what I'm actually using inside of App Builder to get this code. Now it's all there. So when I click done, you can see it shows up here. And then when I go to a grid, over in my grid properties, there's my webinar data source. There's table 1. It'll pick it up. I'm going to use another, it's basically the same URLs. So here I've got Northwind REST set up. And what I did is I added 2 URLs. I added a customers and an orders URL. So you see here I have customers and orders, basically the same exact data that we used earlier. So I'll click done there, and it's basically the same thing. So I've got Northwind REST, and inside Northwind REST, I've got customers, I've got orders. So in my top grid, what I want to use is my Northwind REST customers table. And on the bottom grid, I want to use my Northwind REST orders table. Now I've got a master and I have a detail. If I click preview, you can see here I've got the data from customers, and down the bottom, it's data from orders. This isn't wired up though. So now what we're going to learn today is how to easily wire it up. In the future, we'll do this automatically. We just don't do it today. So, by Q2 2022, you won't have to write any of this code. And in fact, it might even be sooner than that. But even with the Swagger import, you'll have a lot more options in terms of the API that you can use. But this is just the way it happens to be today. We're kind of getting ready for this. You'll notice here we have primary key. So when you add data to a grid, you have a primary key option. This is helping us do CRUD. So right now you can do CRUD with the grid, and you can add features like here we've got Excel style filtering, we've got sorting. You can add any number of other features to the grid real easily by clicking the plus sign. But the master detail, we have to wire up ourselves. So let's go ahead and give this thing a name. We'll call it webinar master detail demo, like so. And I'm going to publish this to GitHub. So we'll call this webinar master detail demo, and we'll make the repository public, and we'll create the repository. So you can see here, it's giving me some options. I'm just going to click publish. And this is really user friendly. It gives me a link here to go right into my repo. So here's my repo. If you're familiar with Angular, you can see here, I've got my source folder. Here's my app. And if I go to master view, HTML, you can see it did all this good stuff here. And I've got some properties like allow filtering on the grid. Filter mode is Excel style, and a few other things. If you remember that primary key, it was set to customer ID. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So what I'm going to do is go back here. I'm going to click code, and I'm going to click this little copy button. So I'm going to actually clone this to my local Git repo, and we'll start working on it. So I'm going to right click on Visual Studio Code. I'll do a new window. I'll do Command Shift P. I'll select Git clone, paste, hit enter. I'm going to tell this to go into my repositories folder, and I'll just open it right up. So now we are in VS Code. I'm going to bring up terminal window. This is the same thing we just saw in GitHub. And what I'm going to do, because it takes a second, I'm going to keep talking as I do an npm install. So let me just type in npm install, and we're going to go ahead and change a couple things here. So the first thing that we want to do is in the actual grid itself is we want to tell it that when someone clicks on it, we want to fire an event in the code behind. So this would be the code behind for the grid page. And you can see here, we're importing our REST service, and we're calling, we're subscribing to our service. So when an event occurs, the subscription will get updated, and then the data will appear. Now, if I right click on get orders and I go to the implementation here, you can see this is the code that changed. If you're looking at this, like if you're still looking at what we have in production, remember I said this is we're publishing this tomorrow. What we used to do is we did not point to the URL. We actually pulled the data in, and then we worked with it locally. Well, now we're going right to the URL, which means it's live data. So now we're enabling you just to connect it directly to live data. I forget the customer's name, but it's if you're on the webinar, you posted something to Discord, you're doing the beer app, or you have a beer company, I believe, and you wanted to know, hey, what's an easy way to do this with live data? This is the way to do it with live data. Super simple, super basic. So what I'm going to do is make a change here to my grid, and I'm just going to copy a few things over from my little helper doc here, and we can talk about it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to set row selection. Whoops, let me get the rest of this. My chat window is in the way. I didn't get everything. So the first thing that we're going to do is set row selection to single. We're going to hide row selectors equals true. If we didn't do this, it would be checkboxes in a master detail. You know, it's easier without checkboxes because you kind of get the feeling that if there was a default checkbox, it would be multi-select. Well, we want to do single select, but we have this row selected event, and we want to pass this whatever is selected in the row, and then get the actual customer ID. And that customer ID is then going to be passed to an updated web service call, and we'll just return the data that we need. So let's go to our code behind. And what I'm going to do here is, just so we can get something going, I am going to paste this in, and this is our row selected event. I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to uncomment these guys here because I want to show you something about using the grid. And I just learned this too, because everything was going great. But then once we added that new feature for primary key, and it updates the grid, it sort of changes what gets shown here. So what I'm going to do is just run this guy. Let me actually file, save all, and we'll do an npm start. And this will take a second. But what happens is, because we add that primary key, you're going to get an object back that has all of the details of the row and then a bunch of other metadata. If you don't have the primary key, it's just an array, and you can directly ask for a property based off of that array. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. So what we're going to do is let this guy get going, and it'll load up on another port besides 4200, because I think I have another one running at the same time. But just get this going here, and if there's any questions, please ask them now. We will we'll jump on those. All right, so cool. So what I'm going to do is hit F12, if I can find it here on my keyboard, and this will open up my tools. F12. There we go. Cool. So a little slow here on my wireless keyboard, and we're going to go to console. So you'll notice here, this is my console. And as I click these rows, I've got, it says undefined. And what I want here is I want to get the customer ID out of, out of this particular row. So let me scroll down here, and you'll notice we've got selection 0 customer ID. I'm going to get rid of customer ID and just say selection 0. I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to click this guy again. And you'll notice now that I've got my customer ID as I'm selecting the individual row. Now let's go back and let's see why this is happening. We're going to get rid of this 1, 2, 3, and we're just going to say log the selection. And now when I log the selection, you'll see that we have an object coming back, but I have to expand it, and you'll see that customer ID 0 is the default implementation of selection 0. And then I get the rest of the array properties, which gives me all the other fields and everything else that I need to work with this particular row. So I wanted to highlight that because based on how you configure your grid, you will have a different result. So let me leave this the way it is. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to, I'm going to go back here and maybe make this a little bit bigger. And let's just, for the heck of it, scroll over. And let's get rid of customer ID. And I'm going to hit save. And we'll go back to our browser. And in our browser, let's go back to our console. And as we're clicking, you'll notice now it's just an object with each individual item. So based on how the grid is configured, your results may vary. So now that I did that, let me go back to my code behind. And in this case, let's do 0 dot customer ID, hit save. Because really what my goal is I really need to get that customer ID. So now I got rid of the primary key. I told it explicitly, just give me an array back. I am going to grab the customer ID just like I would through any array by specifying where it is in the field list, which is 0, and it's going to give it back to me. So now what we have to do is tell our get orders to update. So when I click on this guy, this changes. So let's go ahead and minimize this. And that's why I commented this out, because here we have customer ID. I'm calling get orders customer ID, but get orders does not have does not accept anything for its a parameter. So let's right click on this again, go to its implementation, and here's get orders. And we're going to modify this guy a little bit. There's a couple things that we want to do here, and I'm going to kind of let the errors happen. And then you'll see what I'm talking about. So let me copy or comment this out, and I'm just going to paste this in. So instead of just a return passing the URL, what we actually want to do is return pass the URL, but we want to do a filter, and we want to filter the in the orders table, the customer ID equal to the customer ID that we're passing in. So in Angular, you do that through a pipe, and then they have a utility called map, which will then map the data to what we want inside of the grid, the field list. And then we just call a filter on the data itself. And we have a little issue here with order because order doesn't exist. So we actually have to, or orders doesn't exist. So we have to tell it to use orders. So that will eliminate one error. The other thing we don't have yet is map. And we're using something called map, which exists in the RxJS operators table. So I'm going to copy this, or function, I guess. We'll say map up here, map, and we want to get that from RxJS/operators. So now that we've got that, customer ID, where the heck is customer ID? So what we want to do here is we want to say, give me this customer ID, and this should be a string. So the customer ID is going to get passed in, and pretty much that's all we should need to do. Let's go to File, Save All. Let's go back to our app. And now when I click this guy, what's going to happen is we're getting our customer ID, and you can see that the table underneath is updating with just the orders for that particular customer. So maybe 5 lines of code. I'd love to say 1 line of code, maybe 5 lines of code to update your app to use or to implement a master detail. Now, some of the other stuff that you kind of got by default here. So you can see that I still get all of my, oh, and that looks like something we need to, Constantine is on the call. That looks like a bug to me. So this should not be underneath the grids because I can't hit apply. But anyway, you've got features like sorting, filtering. I can do things like column pinning here. So if I want a column pin to the left, you can see that now those grids stay, or the two columns on the left are staying there as I scroll. So you get all of this built in through those grid features that I showed you. But now let's look at something here. So for the savvy people on the line, you're probably saying to yourself, what does the network look like when I do this? So let's go over to network, and I'm going to do a refresh on the screen. All right, and I'm going to click this row, and you can see here, this is my data coming back. The URL, as I'm hovering over in my developer tools, is saying, hey, you're getting this data from here. It's 90.5 kilobytes. The payload size comes across in 340 milliseconds. And let's click it again. All right, so I'm going back to the server. I'm getting all this data. I'm bringing it down to my client and I'm filtering. That's what I'm doing. So each one of these is doing the same thing. I'm going back and getting this table, right? And, you know, it's a bunch of rows, right? So you can see here, you know, it's not like it's one row. It's bringing back everything for the whole table. It's probably a problem when you have hundreds of thousands of rows. So what you would do is you would modify the service ever so slightly to cache what's coming back here. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to highlight these three rows. I'm going to hit Control/, which will comment those out. And again, that's something I just learned today. Thank you, Brian. And I am going to show you another bit of code that will cache the data locally after the first call, so you don't have to go back to the server every time. And that's using another Angular function called tap. And tap, again, is something we have to import. It lives in RxJS. So I'm going to comma tap. Oh, maybe tap doesn't live there. Is it in operators? Let's do tap and map. Yep, looks like tap is in operators. So now I've got tap and map imported. So what this is going to do is it's going to say, hey, use the same URL. You can see it's the same URL, but instead of just going to do the data filter, which is this line of code, do this first to cache it. Then the next time you go to it, since it's already full, go ahead and do this. And you'll notice we have of here as well. Of needs to get imported from RxJS. And there we go. We'll hit save. Now let's go back to our app. And notice here, I'm going to click a row and I got my data comes back down. Click another row. You'll notice the network traffic is completely silent because the data is cached locally. 9 times out of 10, for 90+% of your applications, you can use this caching mechanism, you know, and then refresh caches as you see fit. If you are doing like a CRM app and you know that I've got 50 salespeople, they're all working on their own customers, it's very rare that there's overlap. You can probably work with the cache all day and then notify the client, hey, go ahead and refresh, or do a refresh every hour or two. A lot of tables we use are utility tables. We never need to go back. So doing some sort of a cache will save you all that network traffic. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why don't I just do a specific query and let the server return the correct stuff every time? So it's always up to date, 100% true. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, what this will look like if you're using, for example, a web API, when you import our Swagger definitions after we get that done next month, you'll have an API that's like, you know, get customer by, or get orders by customer ID. And then you're just going to pass the ID. And so this code would change probably to like 4 lines of code or 3 lines of code again. And they're just doing a simple call and not caching. But that's up to you how you're doing your own data strategy. We let you do JSON. You'll be able to do OData, web API. It doesn't really matter. how you set it up ends up being 100% your choice. What we're trying to do is eliminate as much of this code as possible. So for example, this code here, maybe in a month or 6 weeks, you won't have to add this code because we're going to add it for you. It's all just time for us. You know, we have resources. We're trying to add a bunch of features. There's a bunch of stuff we're working on based on all your feedback. So we're going to continue to eliminate this code that you have to write because that's our goal. If you fast forward a year from now, I mean, we want to handle like 90+% of the code for data access, CRUD, validation, authentication, all that stuff will happen. We're sort of in this infant stage now, which still saves you so much time using App Builder. As you could see, pulling together a screen like this without having to write a single line of code or even a richer application using one of our sample apps really does accelerate the amount of time it will take you to start delivering on these apps sooner. So that wraps up what we wanted to show today. Hopefully you got some good information on how this works. In the follow-up email, we will post a link to this webinar. And it looks like there's no questions. I didn't see anything, Brian. Did you see anything come through on your side?
Nope, nothing came through.
Well, hopefully everyone's just blown away.
Such a good job explaining everything. There's no room for questions, like at all.
Right, exactly. Now I'll just highlight here. If I did want to add more features, like I wanted to add grouping to the grid, and I wanted to add column moving and column resizing, all I have to do is select those boxes there, and all of a sudden everything magically works. And then like what we did is, you'll notice here on the chip, if I click the hyperlink, it gives me some options. So as you're getting used to this configurator, this is the sort of stuff that you would do. So let's wrap this up. I just want to highlight the next webinar will be November 2nd, which is 2 weeks from now. We want to do these every Tuesday. We're also going to do a YouTube live session next Wednesday, I think at 5 p.m. And usually the YouTube live session, YouTube live, is different than the webinar. So we'll cover something different, maybe more preview stuff, or maybe something that we just released. But November 2nd, since we have so many new features coming, like this new one I showed today, like the assets, we have some bug fixes, some other things. I'm just going to go through all the new features, do some demos, and make sure everyone is completely up to date on what's happening with App Builder. So with that, we want you to try this out. Go to infragistics.com, products, App Builder, Indigo Design App Builder. I showed you how to get there earlier. If you have any questions, contact myself or Brian. We will get right back to you. But what I would do if I had a question on App Builder is I would jump on the Discord page, because look at that. Constantine's our director of development, runs all these teams, and he's answering a question just a minute ago. 15 minutes ago. So our team is online and they're ready to help. We want to help you. We want to hear about what you need. Most of all, like what features would make this even better for you. We have a really rich roadmap. We talk about the roadmap all the time, but it doesn't mean anything if it's not hitting a feature that you actually need. So with that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Brian for helping out with these demos. I want to thank Constantine as well and his team for helping out on a couple issues I had very late in my demo process. So thanks, guys, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a good rest of the week.